All right, let's talk about alignment. And I need you to really hear this because this is the piece that almost everyone misses. This is why language patterns don't work for most people. This is why your closing techniques fail. This is why you're not getting the results you want, even though you've learned all the tactics. Alignment. So, what is alignment? And I mean, really, what is it? Alignment is when what you're offering matches what they actually want at an identity level, not just at a surface level, not just at a, yeah, that sounds good level, but at a deep, fundamental, this is who I am and who I want to become level. Let me break that down because it's important. Most people think persuasion is about changing someone's mind, about convincing them to want something they didn't want before, about overcoming their resistance and getting them to say yes. That's not persuasion. That's coercion, and it doesn't work long term. Real persuasion is about discovering and amplifying existing alignment. It's about finding out what someone already wants and showing them how what you offer gets them there. When there's alignment, persuasion is easy. When there's no alignment, persuasion is impossible. Think about it like this. Imagine you're trying to sell someone a gym membership. If they already want to get in shape, if they already value health and fitness, if they already see themselves as someone who works out or wants to be that person, you have alignment. Your job is just to show them why your gym is the right choice. But if they don't care about fitness, if they're perfectly happy being sedentary, if they don't see themselves as a gym person and don't want to be, there's no alignment, and no amount of clever language is going to change that. You could use every embedded command in the book. You could use the most sophisticated sleight of mouth patterns. You could have perfect tonality and pacing and rapport, and it still won't work because there's no alignment. Now, here's where it gets interesting. There are different levels of alignment, and most people only work at the shallowest level. The first level is surface agreement. This is when someone says, yeah, that makes sense, or sure, I can see that. But they're not committed. They're just being polite. They're agreeing with your logic, but not with their whole self. This is not real alignment. The second level is intellectual alignment. This is when someone genuinely agrees with your reasoning. They see the logic. They understand the value proposition. They can articulate why it makes sense, but they still might not buy. Why? Because intellectual agreement isn't enough to drive action. This is closer to alignment, but it's still not there. The third level is emotional alignment. This is when someone feels the rightness of it. They're emotionally connected to the outcome. They want it not just because it makes sense, but because it feels right. This is getting warmer. This is where a lot of sales happen, but it's still not the deepest level. The fourth level, the level that really matters, is identity alignment. This is when what you're offering fits with who they are or who they want to become. It's not just logical. It's not just emotional. It's identity level. It's about their self-concept. It's about their values. It's about the story they tell themselves about who they are. When you have identity alignment, the sale is almost inevitable. When you don't, you're fighting an uphill battle that you'll probably lose. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're selling leadership training. If someone sees themselves as a leader, if being a good leader is part of their identity, if they value leadership and want to be known as a leader, you have identity alignment. They're going to be interested in what you have to say. They're going to be looking for ways to improve. Your job is just to show them why your training is the right fit. But if someone doesn't see themselves as a leader, if they're perfectly content being a follower, if leadership isn't part of their identity or their goals, there's no identity alignment. and you're not going to convince them with tactics. Now, here's the critical insight. You cannot create identity alignment with language patterns. You can discover it, you can amplify it, you can clarify it, but you cannot create it from scratch with embedded commands or presuppositions or any of that stuff. Identity is formed over years through experience and self-reflection and cultural influence. You're not going to change someone's identity in a sales conversation. What you can do is find out if alignment exists, and if it does, you can work with it. If it doesn't, you can either find a different angle where alignment might exist, or you can move on to someone else. This is why qualification is more important than closing. Qualification is where you figure out if there's alignment. Closing is just the natural conclusion of a conversation where alignment exists. But most salespeople skip qualification. They assume everyone is a prospect. They assume their job is to convince anyone and everyone. And then they wonder why their close rates are terrible. Let me tell you something. If you're closing less than 50% of the people you talk to, you have a qualification problem, not a closing problem. You're talking to people who aren't aligned, and no amount of closing techniques is going to fix that. So how do you discover alignment? You ask questions, real questions, questions you actually want to know the answers to, not manipulative questions designed to trap someone, but genuine questions about what they want, what they value, who they see themselves as, where they're trying to go. And then you listen, really listen, not just for the words, but for what the words reveal about their identity and their values and their self-concept. If you hear alignment, you know you have a real prospect. If you don't hear alignment, you know you're probably wasting your time. Now, there's a spectrum of alignment. It's not binary. Someone might be 60% aligned, or 30% aligned, or 90% aligned. The higher the alignment, the easier the sale. The lower the alignment, the harder it is. And here's where it gets strategic. You can sometimes shift the frame to find a different kind of alignment. Let me explain. Let's say you're selling productivity software. If someone doesn't see themselves as organized or productive, there's no alignment on that frame. But maybe they see themselves as successful, or as someone who gets things done, or as someone who values their time. Now you have a different angle. You're not selling them on being organized. You're selling them on being successful, and organization is just the tool. Same product, different frame, different alignment. This is why understanding identity matters so much. When you understand someone's identity, you can find the frames where alignment exists. But again, and I cannot stress this enough, you're not creating the identity. You're just finding where your offer naturally fits with an identity that already exists. Now let's talk about the opposite of alignment, misalignment. This is when what you're offering actually conflicts with someone's identity or values. If someone sees themselves as frugal and you're selling luxury, there's misalignment. If someone values independence and you're selling something that requires teamwork, there's misalignment. If someone identifies as traditional and you're selling cutting-edge innovation, there's misalignment. Can you overcome misalignment? Sometimes, but it's hard, really hard, and it usually requires the person to shift their identity or their values, which is possible, but it takes time and significant life experience. It's not happening in a sales call. So what do you do when you encounter misalignment? Usually the smart move is to disqualify and move on. Unless you're in a position to work with them long-term and help them through an identity shift, which is more like coaching or therapy than sales. Here's the framework I want you to take away from this. Before you try to persuade anyone of anything, figure out if alignment exists. And I mean real alignment, identity level alignment. If it does, your job is easy. Just show them how what you offer gets them what they already want. If it doesn't, don't waste your time trying to force it. Either find a different frame where alignment might exist or move on to someone else. This is the missing piece. This is what nobody talks about. Everyone wants to teach you techniques and tactics and language patterns, but none of that matters without alignment. Alignment is the foundation. Leverage is about having what they need. Alignment is about them wanting what you have. Both have to be present for influence to work, and alignment comes first.